Hola, soy Alain y estoy encantada de presentarme en esta conferencia de DEC. And the rest we're going to do in English. My name's Alain, and one of my goals is to make this world a little more customer-friendly. And I do this for two reasons. First of all, I do it because it's fun. I get a buzz from knowing that somewhere, somehow, someone has had a slightly better or less frustrating day because of the work that me or one of my colleagues did. But I also do it because I've learned over the years that focusing on the customer is probably the most profitable thing that any business can do. So through customer centricity, I see opportunities to create both fun and profit at the same time. Now, over the years, I've had the opportunity of working on some of the largest and some of the smallest customer programs. And that's why my friends at DEC thought it would be a good idea if I gave you a little bit of an overview of the past, the present, and the future in customer experience management. And that's what I'll be doing in this video. I'll take you on a journey through the history of customer experience management, which is probably much longer than you think. And I'll look at the number one challenge that we all face today in making customer experience really that driver of profit and happiness in our business. And then we'll end in part 3 of this presentation by looking at the future, the tomorrow of customer experience, in which we'll look at the main customer trends that will be influencing our profession and how we will need to adapt. Before we get too far into the future, let's remember what customer experience looked like yesterday. While the customer experience profession continues to evolve, it's important to remember that it is as old as trade itself. In fact, if you go to the British Museum, you will find the oldest customer complaint on record. It's 4,000 years old, it comes from Babylon, and it's written in cuneiform on a clay tablet. Now, I don't know if you've ever written on a clay tablet, but it's a lot of work. And if you consider that this particular complaint included hundreds and hundreds of words, this was a customer who was really upset with what he'd bought, and especially with the experience that the vendor provided. What's fascinating to me is that when you read this complaint, it sounds exactly like the type of complaint you would expect to get from customers today. This particular one focused on the purchase of copper ingots, in which the customer, whose name was Nani, was upset with the tradesman named Ea Nazir, both about the quality of the ingots that he'd bought, but also about the treatment that Ea Nazir had given Nani's servant, Gimilsin. When you came, you said to me as follows: "I will give Gimilsin, when he comes, fine quality copper ingots." You left then, but you did not do what you promised me. You put ingots which were not good before my messenger, and said, "If you want to take them, take them. If you do not want to take them, go away." What do you take me for that you treat somebody like me with such contempt? I have sent as messengers gentlemen like yourselves to collect the bag with my money, deposited with you. But you have treated me with contempt by sending them back to me empty-handed several times, and that through enemy territory. Is there anyone among the merchants who trade with Telmun who has treated me in this way? You alone treat my messenger with contempt. The complaint goes on like this for a while, in which the customer covers every aspect of the experience that you can imagine. Now, whether the tradesman then actually did something with this feedback, nobody really knows, but it is proof that customer experience management is of all ages, and also that when customers get upset, they're willing to write really long letters. Throughout history, there are many more examples like this, of which some are really funny, so I can definitely recommend that you look them up. However, for this story, we'll focus more on our recent past, and I'll show you some highlights of customer experience management's evolution over the last few decades, in which we'll start in the 1980s and then go on and on until we reach the present day. The most surprising thing to me when I started looking at the history of modern-day customer experience management was that it has its roots in the US Army, more specifically in the Naval Air System Command. In the 1980s, they wanted to improve the way they worked, and for this, they wanted to rely on something they called total quality management, which was partially invented in the US and refined in Japan and went up and down. But their biggest innovation is that they didn't define quality from the perspective of an expert or some process optimization. They defined it from the perspective of the customer. Quality is defined by the customer's requirements. That's exactly what it says in the Navy manual. And if you think about it, it's logical because the customer in this particular case was the soldier who was trying to stay alive. So quality management was literally a matter of life and death for many of their customers. This also meant that the Navy didn't stop at this slogan, but also introduced a number of guidelines to ensure that this quality level would be met. The first one was that top management has direct responsibility for quality improvement. So no matter where a quality issue might have arisen, the top leadership of the Navy would be responsible for its resolution, not personally, but making sure that the job would get done. The second guideline was that increased quality comes from systematic analysis and improvement of work processes. If you want to improve the quality, you need to set up a process to ensure that you continuously measure whether what you do meets the customer requirements, and if it doesn't, you have to keep improving. And finally, quality improvement is a continuous effort that is conducted throughout the organization. In other words, it's not one department which needs to make sure that the customer gets the quality they are looking for. It is everyone in the Navy who has to make sure that the end result is achieved. I have to say when I saw this that I was really impressed with the US Navy because I would dare to apply these principles to any customer project I would do today, and they would still hold up. But they did leave one open question, and that is, how do you define quality from a customer perspective? I mean, when is quality good enough, and when is it actually too good, and when are customers really excited about it? Now, here the US Navy didn't have an immediate answer, but in the 1990s, there was a Japanese professor who came to the aid. Noraki Kano of the University of Tokyo introduced a model for customer satisfaction which was so influential that it has become known as the Kano model. In it, he described the drivers for customer satisfaction from two perspectives. On the one hand, there were the basic customer needs, which if they were not met would leave a customer dissatisfied. For example, if I buy a steak in a restaurant and it comes to the table cold, I will be unhappy. So as a minimum, a restaurant owner will need to ensure that any steak they serve is warm enough, no matter what else they might be doing in that restaurant. At the other side of the spectrum are then the delight attributes. These are the things that a business can do to really delight their customers, to put a smile on their face. Going back to my steak example, I was once in New York in a restaurant where the steak actually arrived sizzling at my table. And the chef came out to check whether it was perfectly to my liking because he'd heard I was Belgian and he knew that Belgians were kind of peculiar about the way they liked their meat. While defining this, Kano also identified that any delightful innovation would over time become another basic need, and therefore companies would continuously need to innovate. In fact, to be competitive, they would continuously need to perform above the basic needs level on those topics for which customers would be willing to pay more, because that would generate the funds required to keep innovating and therefore keep delighting customers, if only because today's delight factor would eventually become tomorrow's basic. Again, these are principles which are perfectly applicable to our current situation. However, what's surprising to me is that based on some of the benchmarks I'll be talking about later, only 19% of companies today are capable of defining these basic and delight levels for their customers. So in other words, while the theory's been around for decades, its application still needs work. A man who realized the complexity of making this complete model work was Jan Carlson. When he became the CEO of SAS Airlines, he understood that his thousands of employees couldn't focus on every customer all the time, and perhaps they even shouldn't. So he introduced the moments of truth, high-value interactions during which a customer forms an impression of a brand. In other words, while the basic needs that Kano described all mattered, there were moments that mattered more than the others, and as a business, you definitely wanted to get those rights. Practically, as a leader, it also gave you guidance on where to prioritize your limited resources. Now, while these moments of truth were helpful as a concept, their selection was still fairly intuitive. And even if you decided to focus on one particular experience, then you still had to convince your management or your shareholders that this would make more money for the business. So in the 1990s, there were two innovations which started helping management teams do this. The first was the customer journey. The second was loyalty economics. The concept of a customer journey was first introduced in 1994 by Louis Carbone and Stephen Hackle as an experience blueprint. In their article Engineering Customer Experiences, they introduced the idea that if companies wanted to create loyal customers, they had to design the context of the product or services that they delivered at every interaction. Or as the authors called it, they had to manage the customer experience. And a few years later, in 1996, Fred Reichheld then proved with numbers that these loyal customers were more profitable than any other customer category. And he thus started laying the foundations for the customer experience business case. But we all know that Fred didn't leave it at that, because almost a decade later in 2003, he introduced the one metric which would affect almost every customer experience program on the planet, the Net Promoter Score. And through his analysis, he actually put some numbers to what Professor Kano was already saying in the 80s. Customers that were delighted to the point that they would recommend were actually the most profitable ones. And customers which didn't have their basic needs met, which were detractors, were actually the least profitable ones, and they could even cost the business money. And while the Net Promoter Score and its later Net Promoter System had its controversies, the proof that happy customers were more profitable started a customer experience arms race among businesses worldwide. It led to customer-centric transformation programs, the introduction of automated customer voice and feedback programs, customer mindset programs, an explosive growth of customer journey mapping as a practice, which, because of digitalization, became ever more multi-channel. And as computers became more powerful, customer analytics and big data also entered the picture. And as everyone went to work, we started approaching our current age. Today, customer experience is in a little bit of a pickle, and I'm not just talking about the COVID crisis. Yes, great progress has been made in customer experiences worldwide, and all that work has paid off. But if you look at the Forrester reports of the last 3 years of the previous decade, it's clear that something's wrong. In the 2017 CX Index, they noted that CX quality had plateaued or declined for most industries and companies. And for 2018, they predicted that 30% of companies would see further declines in CX performance. In their next report, for 2019, they indicated that Customer Experience Index scores would show little movement for the third year in a row, and 62% of brands were bunched up in an undifferentiated clump, which all led to their most recent prediction for 2020, where they indicated an extreme bifurcation of CX in which the leaders would keep getting better and the companies that cut their programs would see a drop in quality. Better than any Forrester report, the COVID crisis has shown us all the difference between customer experience leaders and laggards. And that makes it all the more important to really understand what it takes to be successful in customer experience management today. As Forrester started sounding the alarm bell, I wanted to better understand the difference between those companies which were apparently super successful in customer experience management and those which didn't seem to get out of the starting blocks. And this study took me in many directions, but it also led me to a painful and simple truth. Yes, there was the corporate silos which got in the way of doing what was right for the customer. Yes, there was the big learning curve because none of us ever went to customer school. And yes, there were these leaders who apparently had a magical customer touch and others who didn't really seem to care. But the real reason, the real differentiation between the leaders and the laggards was that the second group didn't really have a customer plan. Whenever these companies talked about the customer, they either did it in big mission statements which sounded good but were very hard to action, or they did it in the context of optimizing a particular part of the customer experience or a specific customer capability, which would yield results in that particular area but only sporadically impact the rest of the company. But for the majority of them, there was nothing in the middle. Even in many so-called transformations which aimed at making the company number one in recommendation for their industry, there was often no company-wide plan or prioritization system that addressed all the capabilities that were required to deliver customer success and that allocated mid-term budgets and objectives to these different areas. In a way, they acted like an athlete that said they wanted to win the Olympics but didn't make a training plan, or if they had a training plan, they only did a few workouts now and then but didn't really look at their diet or their breathing or their mindset or anything else that makes you a champion. And as any performance coach will tell you, it's exactly this focus on developing all the capabilities that makes the difference between success and failure. Or to paraphrase the great football coach Guus Hiddink, if you focus on playing the right game, the results, the scores, will follow. But from a company-wide perspective, too many of the customer experience laggards didn't seem to have this broad focus, if they even understood what the game was that they needed to play. So I started on a journey to discover the right game to be played in customer experience management, not just in a theoretical model, but in a measurable way. I wanted to create a dashboard which would show leaders in the organization whether their business was being customer-centric and if it wasn't, where they could make improvements. This became the customer fit model, which consists of 20 components across 4 domains. Now, I'm not going to take you through every detail of the model because we will be sharing this presentation later on, and you can just stop the video to have a look in detail at each of those 20 areas. But the important thing to remember is that when we started measuring the performance of the companies against each of these 20 components, the reasons for Forrester's predictions became very, very clear. If you looked at the 20 customer experience capabilities to be managed, company performance was variable at best. Sure, based on a self-assessment, leadership teams considered themselves great at understanding their customers' needs and at acting as customer-centric leaders. But when taking a look at the other areas of the benchmark, you quickly found that when it came to acting on customer feedback, turning customer efforts into profit, actually developing customer capabilities, only a very small number hit levels which would be comparable to someone who'd be considered a performance athlete. Going back to our Japanese friend Norika Kano, the most surprising element to me is that after all of the work that has been done on customer experience management, only 19% of companies are able to fully describe the customer experience that they want to offer their customers in terms that their employees can act on. And if you cannot describe what great looks like, how can you expect anyone to deliver it? The end result is that when we total all the capabilities, the median performance across the benchmark is mediocre. While there are shining examples of excellence, the majority of businesses act like athletes who say that they want to win the championship or the Olympics, but instead of committing to the training and capability program of a performance athlete, they behave like a casual runner who goes running on Sunday, if it's not raining, and if they can have a glass of wine afterwards. And while there's nothing wrong with Sunday running or wine, in performance sports, that's not good enough. Today, we don't really need another tool or metric to deliver great customer experiences. It's not like having a better t-shirt or a better pair of shoes will suddenly turn us into an Olympic athlete. What will work, however, is to take the mindset of that athlete, the mindset that looks at customer experience not as a set of initiatives or something to elect here or there within the organization, but as a discipline that affects every aspect, every capability of the business, and it needs to be trained over and over again so that it becomes muscle memory for the organization. By doing that, you will make sure that customer experience management becomes something that everybody can get into. And at the same time, you create resilience within the organization so that it can evolve its customer experience together with the changing customer needs, even if the sky falls down. When you develop this customer training program, you need to consider 3 steps. First, you need to scan the state of the different customer capabilities in your business. I showed you averages before, but you need to understand where your business is strong and where it is weak. Then, you need to create a plan in which you focus on improving those capabilities which will give you the biggest win. And then you address them in a series of focused sprints where you ideally just copy best practices and only really start innovating once you know what you're doing. If this sounds like a lot of work, well, it is, because winning the Olympics isn't something you do quickly on a Sunday afternoon. But it isn't necessarily more work than all the initiatives you're currently taking, and definitely doesn't take more budget than what you're probably spending today. It's just about looking at the bigger picture and allocating resources where they have the highest impact. And to be frank, whether you like it or not, customer experience management has become a performance sport, so if you want to be in the front of the race, you have very little choice. To help you get started, I've set up a free customer fitness scan, which you can use to assess the customer capabilities of your organization. In about 20 questions, which typically take about 18 minutes to answer, you will go through all the 20 capabilities which I mentioned in the model before. You will then get a summary which you can use to identify those areas where your business is doing well and where it needs to improve. Now, just to be clear, beyond this summary, we will not send you anything unless you tick the little tick mark to say that you want to receive more information. So start working on those capabilities so your business becomes robust and you're ready for the future of customer experience. When it comes to customer experience management, there's a lot of theories out there. If you type it into Google, you will quickly find a lot of comments, articles, and even videos about the role of technology and how it's going to change everything. But from my perspective, the future is mainly driven by customer needs, not necessarily by whatever new software may come around. And there I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to conclude a research in working with 30 other customer experience experts from around the world on a co-creation where we try to imagine the customer experience needs of the future. And during the lockdown, I had the opportunity of reconnecting with some of them to kind of update our findings, and this makes me fairly confident that the future of customer experience will be driven by 4 very specific customer needs. The first is know me and what I want. If you remember the movie Minority Report, you'll remember that Tom Cruise was greeted everywhere with personalized experiences and products that really fit their need. Now, in a way, Netflix, Amazon, Spotify, and Facebook have already created this world, but somehow their ability to predict our needs still has a little bit of wonder in it. Yet tomorrow, this will become an expectation, and customers will actually expect you to know what they want even before they've said it. Secondly, is the need to be treated like a human being, because as the world gets more digital, it also gets more cold. But until further notice, it's still humans that are paying the bills. And regardless of how efficient we want digitalization to be, and even how efficient customers want life to be, they still want to be treated like humans. They want warmth, they want attention, they want friendliness, and above all, they want empathy. So when creating the experiences of the future, it's essential that you use digital technology to make everything as easy and efficient as possible, but at the same time make sure that you do not lose your human warmth, which is going to create the relationship with your customers. The third trend, which is a little further out, especially now it's been delayed by the COVID crisis, is a desire for experiences to be immersive. This trend started in retail, where stores are more and more immersive experiences and where you go to really be entertained as much as to buy product. Even if you buy a Porsche today in major markets, you don't just buy it in a dealership anymore, you go to the racetrack where you are completely immersed in the brand and in the experience. Something that's also happening more and more in B2B, where, for instance, the IBM Watson Experience Center shows you not just what the computer can do, but actually has customers, your customers, talking to you about their topics through an avatar. So if you've got a premium business and you want your customers to really pay attention to you tomorrow, you've got to immerse them in your brand, in your environment, in your experience, because otherwise they will turn to those who do. Which gets me to the last customer expectation of the future, which was already there when we first researched the topic, but which got massively accelerated by the COVID crisis. And that is that customers want to see that you mean it, that your organization has a purpose which goes beyond making money, and that you don't just use this purpose in advertising, but really try to make this world a better place by being more sustainable, by being more fair, and by having a longer-term view of your role in society. The final future customer expectation is probably the hardest one to meet because many of the sustainability goals directly conflict with the profit goals of many organizations. But it's one you really want to pay attention to because all the signs are there that the companies who will be successful in the next decade are the ones who can get it right. Which brings me to the end of this presentation. We've looked at the future customer expectations. Know me and what I want, treat me like a human being, immerse me and show me that you mean it. And to meet these expectations, you need to develop your corporate capabilities. You need to develop your fitness in a way that goes beyond initiatives and programs and really treats customer experience as a discipline, because that will allow you to deliver against your customers' basic needs and also delight them whenever it's required, so that you can be performing and that you can always deliver quality the way the customer has defined it. So all that remains right now is to thank you for your time and for watching this presentation on the past, present and future of customer experience management. I hope you found it useful and that there were a few tidbits in there which you're going to take home. Now before you go, don't forget to scan your customer fitness on the URL which I shared earlier and which you can find on the screen right now. Also, feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to get to know you, maybe even have a conversation, so together we can make this world a more customer-friendly place. May the customer force be with you.